The Canon EOS R6M II is a hybrid 24.2 megapixel mirrorless camera with endless capabilities. I have been using this camera since 2023 and I have a lot to tell and share about this camera. So without any further ado, let us get started out with the video. Let us get started with talking about who is this camera for. The camera is perfect for someone who is into videography as well as photography. Why? Because this camera provides you with a lot of features and you should go for this camera if you are on a budget and wanting to upgrade yourself. I haven't had any issues with this camera using it in the real world. The photos and videos that this camera takes is amazing and usable. If you want to use this camera on a set as your B cam or your C cam, you can without a doubt go for it. What are its pro features? As I mentioned, this camera is a hybrid and so it does have some amazing features. Starting with its sensor, it has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, and yes, we did not get a stacked sensor with this model, but if we talk about photo features about this camera, it can do around 40 fps in raw burst mode, which is quite amazing for Canon to put in so much fps in this camera. But it does comes up with a catch. And the catch is, whenever you take those raw images and store them, it stores them as a compiled file. And then you have to go into your camera gallery and extract those images by yourself manually. This can be intimidating at times whenever you are dealing with hundreds of pictures. Now, if we talk about the video features that this camera provides, there are many things to be talked about, such as it can do 4K 60 fps with no crop, 1080p, it can do in 120 fps in slow motion, and it goes up to 180 frames per second. We also get Canon Log 3 with this camera, but I would love to have Canon Log 2 as well. Moving on to the next, let us talk about design and build quality. So how does this camera feel? The ergonomics of this camera is on point. The feeling that you get when you have a hold of this camera in your hand is amazing. The button placement that this camera has is also on point. I don't feel overwhelmed while using the buttons. Now moving on to the top of this camera, it does have a dial with various features. The most common that I use is manual and sometimes TV, which is shutter priority mode when I'm into those run and gun situations. There's one custom button at the front and I have set it for the menu. If we move on to the left hand side of this camera, there is a dedicated switch for photo and video, which is if you are someone who takes photos and videos together, this is your way to go. And I guess this is the first camera from Canon to come out with a dedicated photo and video switch. The thing that I've changed here is that there is a dedicated video recording button on the top. But as I'm mostly into videos, I have made the shutter button of my camera as the button for recording. So when I half press this button, the camera focuses on the subject, and when I fully press the shutter button, it starts to record. Now moving on to the next, let us talk about the video capabilities of this camera. This thing can do around 4K 60 fps, which is still quite amazing. Now it depends upon what kind of work you do. 4K 60 can be a good thing as well as a deal breaker for some. But to be honest, the 4K that this camera gives is just beautiful. The sharpness is there because this camera consists of a 6K full frame sensor. And it is downscaling that 6K image into a 4K image, because of which we get sharper and more detailed image output. The other feature that this camera has is zebras and false color. I prefer to use false color as it gives me a proper and accurate exposure within the camera, especially when I'm using Canon Log 3. While exposing Canon Log 3, the base ISO of this camera is L100. The noise that will be generated in the image is very low, but we may lose the dynamic range. Now it depends upon the type of setup you have made. Depending on the amount of light you have in your room, you can crank up your ISOs according to it. Now with the EOS R6M II, to get that full dynamic range out of your sensor, you need to keep your ISO at 800. Yep. There will be a lot of noise that will be coming into your image, but with the help of proper lighting, we can let go of the noise. Moving on to the next, overheating. Now I have been using this camera for nearly 2 years and I haven't had any major overheating issues with this camera. Of course, the overheating temperature symbol has popped up with this camera here and there, but I have faced that symbol less than 5 times, which is very less. The primary reason being that I only use 1080p and not 4K, as there is no demand for 4K in my locality yet. Now, moving on to the next, the rolling shutter. The Canon EOS R6M II does not have a stacked sensor, as a result of which we do get those rolling shutter effect when we pan our camera back and forth. Hopefully with the EOS R6M III, we get this fixed. Moving on to the next, the autofocus system. As we are familiar with the Canon's dual pixel autofocus, we know that it is one of the best autofocus out there. With this camera, we do get eye tracking features such as we can either track only the left eye or the right eye or even both. When we talk about subject tracking, this camera can track people, animals or vehicles, or it can be set to auto as well. I mostly leave it at auto as it works perfectly. The only problem that I have faced is with the STM lenses, as it's hard for the camera to focus as the lens is very slow. Now moving on to the next, we have stabilization. The in-body stabilization of this camera is good. I usually use it when I'm taking running shots. It provides us with 2 levels of stabilization. And yes, if you go out with the max level of stabilization, you're going to have cropped image. Battery and connectivity. The battery that this camera takes is the LP-E6NH battery. The battery life of this camera is really good. With just 2 batteries, I can shoot all day long. Until now, I haven't run into those situations where my battery runs out faster than expected. This camera has connectivity options such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth and external monitor capabilities. With these options, you can use your Wi-Fi to transmit the images from your camera to your computer for a live feed with very less latency, or it can be also connected to your phone via the Camera Connect app. As we know, this is a RF mount camera, and with an EOS R to EF lens adapter, we can easily connect a EF lens and use it with this camera. I personally love to use my STM EF lenses with this camera because I just like the look that it gives. And there are a vast number of lenses that you can use with this camera. To be honest, this camera is not complicated at all. If I will give you a proper example, this camera is just a normal EOS R with some added features that makes this camera a whole lot easier to get used. As of today, this camera still sets back at $24.99, which is still quite expensive. But you can even get a used one for half of the price. As this camera is 2 years old, there has been a lot of other new cameras out there on the market which have better features. At this price point, 2 years ago, it was just amazing to have camera with these features. The performance that this camera gives is phenomenal. It's weather resistant, it's durable, and more importantly, it's reliable. It also has 2 SD card slots into which both video and photos can be recorded simultaneously. It also has timecode features. This proves that this camera is capable of some real-world professional use. Since I use this camera for work, I can say that this camera is the best investment I have ever made for my business. From the very beginning, I was a Canon guy and I'm used to this ecosystem. Now since I have switched over to DaVinci Resolve, I get to use this camera to its fullest potential. The only downside I have with this camera is that it records the videos in H.265, which is quite CPU intensive. Other than that, I have not experienced any major issues with this camera. It's light and sturdy, just perfect enough to get my work done. And if you're someone who owns cameras such as the C70s, C80s or the Canon R5Cs, then this camera is perfect for you, as it can be a backup camera in your backpack, can act as a B cam or a C cam, as it will help you to get your work done. Thank you very much for watching. If you found something informative in this video, make sure to like, share, comment, and do not forget to subscribe to my channel, as more videos related to cinematography and cameras are on their way. Till then, you can watch all these videos right over here. That's it for me, and I'll see you in the next one.